It's time to go back to, I guess, somewhat budget in today's video, where in the previous video we looked at an A620, we looked at it with a 7800 X3D, and this was ASrock's cheapest board. And I found out in that video that it was actually fine, especially if you're gaming. But I realized this board did have its limitations, and ASrock then decided, they said, look, take a look at our A620 Pro RS, which has a higher power limit and also has a better VRM that's also slotted with heat sinks that will help out and handle more than just, say, a 7800 X3D. So this board right here, we are going to go the whole way today. We're going to be coupling in a Ryzen 9 7950X with this motherboard right here and seeing if it can indeed not just handle the heat, but also if we can get a good tune out of this thing and really make it a viable option, where these boards right here, I mean, this one's coming in under $100 and this one's only slightly over $100. So if you're looking to get in, especially with the recent huge price cuts on Ryzen 7000 chips, especially the non-X3D variants, I think this could be a good option. So let's check this combo out and see if it's insanity or is it actually viable.
Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in the description below.
So first things first, with our testing right here today is we are running Cinebench R23 with default settings out of the box, and we're doing a 10-minute stress test just to see what the VRM temperatures are like, what the behavior is like on this motherboard, and we're going to let this run until it's finished and come back and see the behavior. But good thing is here is even after 5 minutes of testing, the board is running still at 165 watts. So that gives us a little bit more headroom than we would otherwise have on, say, the HDV, which caps out at 120-ish watts. And even then, if you get the really cheap version, that caps out even lower. So 165 watts is, I think we can really do something decent, providing the temperatures don't get too hot. So we're gonna let that heat all soak up into the VRM and check it out very soon with the thermo camera and see if it holds up out of the box, but also what we can do in terms of the tuning right now and really maximize our power efficiency even out of an A620 motherboard. Also, really good thing is memory is running absolutely fine. Our DDR5 kit, the same speeds it would be otherwise getting on an X670E, for example, is running on an A620. So that's some great news. Now, I know there's people out there saying, Brian, try the 8000 megahertz, try the highest speeds. That actually changes the CPU's divider, and it doesn't really give you any extra performance. And in fact, it can hurt performance in some instances, especially gaming, ever so slightly. So we've just finished up the testing, and I am actually kind of in ways blown away by the results here, because out of the box, the VRM went up to a shade over 70 degrees, and the heatsink went up to 53 degrees. And so this is actually extremely good for an entry-level motherboard with a flagship CPU running Cinebench R23. Now keep in mind, it is keeping the temperatures lower, under 80 degrees, because it's limited to 165 watts, but it's doing a fantastic job of handling that 165 watts. I'm still really shocked, because once you take away the chipset, that's this little thing in the bottom right hand corner of the motherboard, once you take that away, it's roughly around $25. Once you exclude that little chip and the cost for this board, it's $100 roughly that ASrock's charging for this board minus the chipset costs, and it's got Wi-Fi 6 as well, Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth on it. So I don't know how ASrock's actually making really any money on this board, considering the results are this good. I'm really shocked. This board is an absolute deal considering what it can do. And that's at retail price too. So I don't know, let me know in the comments. Am I the only guy who's just actually kind of shocked that this can handle a 7950X out of the box with nothing blaringly wrong? Like nothing is absolutely bad. It's actually pretty solid. And in fact, I prefer these results coming out of this CPU out of the box because we're keeping the CPU under 80 degrees. I like to do that for longevity, and it drops the voltage down on the CPU to around 1.14 volt while it was doing the stress test, as opposed to when I tested the 7950X on an X670, it was getting much hotter and it was running at higher voltages around 1.3-ish, which were too high. And even though I was giving it slightly better performance in Cinebench, it wasn't something that I would be comfortable running 24/7. Though what's still outstanding is a couple of things. We've got a water cooler on here, so all these results have definitely given us a chance now to test out the legendary Snowman cooler. So we're going to test that out very soon, but we're also going to try tune this thing up right now and see what kind of results we can get. Now, unfortunately on A620, you don't really get the full access of Ryzen Master in terms of CPU core control and also voltage control, but we do still get within Ryzen Master, even on A620, temperature control. So if we can't do anything in the BIOS, we're going to come back and control this CPU via a simple method with Ryzen Master, and that's the temperature control. So let's get into it and see what unfolds, and we'll come back. So we're in the BIOS now, and unfortunately we do not have any options to manually control the CPU voltage nor the clock speeds. However, we do have that temperature control setting that we had in the Ryzen Master software. So we can find out the best temperature via this setting in Windows, and then we can come back into this BIOS and then set that in manually. However, there's also a few other things you can do in this BIOS, and that is go into the Advanced tab and then go into AMD CBS, and you can go to NBIO options, and you can go down to GFX configuration, and you can actually disable the iGPU here, which I personally like to do since I do not use this iGPU on AMD's 7000 series at all. And if you do come into an issue where you need that backup display, you can always just reset your BIOS and it's not going to be a problem. So those two settings, as well as another good thing is that your rebar support is enabled by default. However, it's only on the 1 terabyte setting here, so we can actually change that down to 8 terabytes. So that's sort of what I would be doing here in the BIOS quickly with the AMD CPU. Now, there are a few other settings that do affect input latency. However, we're going to make a dedicated video towards that. So we're just going to save these changes, get back into Windows, and see what sweet spot we can work out with the temperature. So now we're coming back after that cutscene. We are in Windows with our final tune set up here for this A620. Now, what I found with Ryzen Master was the temperature control worked really well. It's actually one of the easiest undervolts you can technically do. It's just change one setting, temperatures are lower on CPU, voltage will be lower, less stress on the motherboard. And when we did this at two different settings, 60 degrees, we first tested that, and the clock speeds were too low for my liking. They were around 4.5 gigahertz, when on an X670 with manual tune on 7950X, we managed to get around 55 degrees with the same cooler, and we also got 4.8 gigahertz at 1 volt roughly. So this time around it was 1.05 volt at 60 degrees, and as we said before, the wattage was around 128 watts. So it's actually the same wattage as the X670 tune that we did in a previous video, but it's just not that good. I wouldn't be happy with this configuration. But changing it now, raising it to 70 degrees. Here's where the magic actually started to unfold, where we've now got 35,415 Cinebench points. We're now at about 150 watts at 1.1 volt. And here's where we took things a step further after being quite impressed with these results. I then went into the BIOS because I don't want to use Ryzen Master and rely on that program. And actually I want to uninstall it after I'm done tuning. I then locked in that 70 degrees manual in the BIOS, but also since we disabled that iGPU, it now enables us to have control over the CPU voltage, which we can drop via an offset of 60 millivolt roughly to try and drop that down to 1.04 volt. And here's where it kind of really sort of had some weird behavior, where it was actually boosting the CPU reasonably high. And it was doing so with higher speeds, and we're getting now 36,000 points at roughly 150 watts. So this manual tune with two settings in the BIOS on an A620 with a motherboard that can just perfectly handle it with 6200 megahertz memory is phenomenal on this setup right now. But before we conclude this video, let's now drop on the Snowman, same settings, and just check everything out, because I want to see what points. It's mainly going to be just the change in points here in the clock speeds. So we'll monitor quickly the clock speeds and the temperatures here one more time, and then we'll change over to the Snowman and see what it can do on this exact configuration. So now with the $20 AliExpress Snowman special on a 16-core CPU, I never thought I'd really be testing this kind of levels of insanity on tech and getting decent results. We did just that, get decent results with this setup. Now I do say decent because it wasn't impressive, but it was okay. So 34,000 points roughly versus around 36,500. So we are dropping quite a bit there in terms of points on Cinebench multi-thread, and the speeds unfortunately did go from a roughly 4.875 gigahertz on this 70 degree 60 millivolt undervolt to roughly 4.6 gigahertz. So the difference between air and water cooler here does matter quite a bit on the 7950X. However, that said, the Snowman did handle the CPU fine at that 70 degrees, same ambient temperatures, and it did do so whilst remaining whisper quiet. So that's always one good thing about that Snowman air cooler. But that being said, from the wall power consumption, 265 watts with the water cooler, the 360 mil Corsair cooler we used here today versus 220 watts on the Snowman air cooler. Now, you guys might be wondering about the Arctic the A420 Freezer 2. That's on my main system, cooling that down right now. So I want to get one more, because that cooler, I'm seeing that go on now for like 130 bucks, which for a pretty much flagship water cooler is impressive to see that price. Now, let's get this video concluded, because what we've got here is a $125 motherboard from ASrock, not just handling a 7950X absolutely fine, but doing some things I feel better than an X670 would with a 7950X. For starters, the 7950X out of the box has way too aggressive voltage, way too aggressive temperatures, and so this 165 watt limit automatically on the motherboard sort of fine tunes the CPU out of the box, where you're getting roughly 4.8 gigahertz and you're going up to around 80 degrees. But then we can fine tune that more with a good water cooler and go down to 70 degrees, offset in the BIOS, and now we're getting roughly close to 4.9 gigahertz at 150-ish watts. So we can tune, but even if you were just super lazy and you got a 7950X and you just popped it in, go into the BIOS, lock in your memory profiles, you'd actually have, in my opinion, a better configuration for longevity for your 7950X than an X670 would deliver. So that's one benefit there. And then testing out the VRM temperatures, they're absolutely fine. Anything under 80 degrees on your VRM temps, I'm happy with. Gives you a bit of wiggle room. This was around 71 degrees. And so that's impressive. I think ASrock this time around with their entry-level motherboards have done a really good job, but this Pro RS, I see why they really wanted me to check it out. just takes the cake in terms of having feature sets. You've got the Wi-Fi 6E there, you've got good temperatures, good VRM, and actually good control considering it's an A620. I thought there was like a hard limit of 120 watts on these motherboards, but I've also used 2 different BIOSes now, and it's 165 watts on this board, and it handles it fine. So when they told me at Computex, I kind of had a feeling with Computex when they were saying, you know, this goes up to like 160 watts, fine, it can handle it consistently. I was kind of like, yeah, I want to put that to the test. But I put it to the test here today, and it's no BS. It's just straight up. That's what they're saying, and what they're delivering are exactly the same. And I think Hardware Unboxed have taken a look at some of their entry-level boards in the past and been very critical of ASrock. But it's good to see on their website they are sort of under-reporting now and saying, okay, you can use a Ryzen 9, but it's going to be limited to 120 watts. But on the Pro RS, it's gone up to 165 watts. So there is some benefit there. And actually, there is some, I'm going to make some further videos on this content in relation to these motherboards. But in terms of an A620 and a 7950X, I just didn't think we would end up here at the final result. So this CPU, it's a flagship CPU. I got mine in Tokyo on a deal for like $400 and something. I forgot exactly how much it was, but it was a bargain for this CPU. It's now on Amazon for like $530. So it's a little bit expensive, but I like the fact that you've got more wiggle room on this CPU than you otherwise would on the X3D variants. And I think if you're using it for more workstation first, gaming second, the 7950X is actually one of the best CPUs out there at the moment. And to be honest with the X3Ds, I just don't need that gaming FPS it provides. I've tested the 7800 X3D, I've tested the 7950 X3D, and yeah, you're getting into the realm of, okay, are you the pro player playing for the end game world performance? And it's, even if you are that person, it's still going to come down to your skill on the day, your sort of alert, how alert are you, and all that stuff. Did you sleep well? It's not going to come down to, okay, I've got 2 more FPS at 360 FPS or so. So anyway, sort of getting back to topic here, 7950X, A620, ASrock Pro RS, mind blown about how good this combination actually works in the real world. And even if you want to tune it up, you've got some sort of auxiliary settings that you can play with, kind of like a Baldur's Gate 3 quest, where you unlock one thing and then the other thing comes out with those CPU voltage settings. That's kind of come to fruition here today. But hopefully this didn't confuse you guys too much. I'm just going to get back to doing content like this and going deep into the wiggle room here of an A620. And also, one thing I will add before I get on out of here, I'm that impressed that I'm actually going to say to ASrock, if you make an A620 ITX Pro RS, I will use that exact combination in my main system, because there's a heap of different input latency settings that I've figured out, and Ryzen 7000, it can be a very snappy CPU, especially coupled in with 16 cores on the 7950X. You've got a recipe here for an absolute workstation machine. And for instance, sometimes you'll come into these roadblocks in Premiere Pro, which is actually kind of what I've come into right now, where it can come into these very CPU intensive parts where you've got layer on top of layer, and all those footages need to be only transcoded from the CPU. And it just takes so long. It takes up to an hour. So in that case, you need the extra cores and threads to power through that. And so I'm actually going to say, if ASrock do make an A620 ITX Pro RS, I'm going to be on that, and I will test it out, main rig it, and see how we go, because there's just some impressiveness to be extracted from this combination. Anyhow, guys, with all that aside, do let us know in the comments section below, what are your thoughts and opinions on ASRock's A620 Pro RS, Micro ATX as well, and also the 7950X in this combination. I'm just seeing the prices on all this stuff is actually getting very good for a flagship setup, and look forward to reading your comments in the comment section down below, just like this question of the day here, which comes from Michael Gould 7405, and they ask, take solace in the fact that you are a real gamer. If you don't lose a month here and there, you've got to ask yourself, am I really into PC gaming? And so, yeah, recently in the video that we did, I'll put the link up here, I put in the video that I had a hiatus because I was playing so much Baldur's Gate 3. There was no other way to say it. And although it might be embarrassing, it's just how I kind of used to roll in PC gaming. There was these games that came out and they were just so immersive. That, for instance, Baldur's Gate 2 was one of those games in the past. World of Warcraft, when that came out, classic WoW, and then following expansions up to Frozen Throne, they were so immersive as well. Like, we're talking very long gaming sessions and constantly thinking about different combinations and spells and all these different things and discussing it with your friends. Then sort of after 2010, there was kind of like PC gaming for me personally got very boring, I think, in that games sort of became more simplified and they took away a lot of that magic that made a PC game, in my opinion, really awesome. Then Baldur's Gate 3 just comes straight back with all that was in the old school games. Full customization, like multi-classing, do what you want, and that just really gets the brain cells firing, and I love that, and that's what PC gaming is for me personally, is having more options, customization. If you don't like that, then I think games could use that Final Fantasy VIII system, if I remember that right. It had the option for simplified and advanced. That's all game makers have to do. Add in the advanced options for people that want to do it, add in the simplified options for people that don't care and just want to quickly go through the game and enjoy it that way. I think we'd all be happy. But a lot of games have sort of just taken that approach of, no, let's just focus on the simplified, forget about the advanced, and it's sort of left a guy like me sort of being like, okay, well, how can I excite these brain cells? And so I guess we just delved into tech, and that's a lot of fun, and that's going to continue because that was a new I guess that was a new hobby that was unlocked because PC games kind of got boring in my opinion. But Baldur's Gate 3 just brought that back. Anyhow, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. Hope that answers that question. Wait, I didn't even answer it properly. I guess, yeah, if you're a real PC gamer, you're going to be very into your PC games. And so Baldur's Gate 3 got me back in that way. Hope that answers that question that time. And if you stayed this far, enjoying that content, you know what to do. Hit that sub, ring that bell. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.